Hi there, I'm Vivian from ANU Academic Skills, and in this video I'm going to be talking about executive summaries and introductions for engineering and computer science reports. Basically, executive summaries and introductions do very similar things. They both give an overview of what the report is going to be about. But the key difference is that executive summaries will go into a lot of detail about the results and the recommendations that you provide, whereas introductions give a bit more of the context of why are you doing this report? What are the motivations for this report? So looking at executive summaries, typically they include a brief outline of the context and what the aims are for the report. They include an outline of your key findings and your key message. So overall, was your design effective? Overall, was your design implementation effective? Why are you, for instance, doing this report? What is your key message about whether it was successful or unsuccessful? And the recommendations can also be included in the executive summary. So you could even give a list of the recommendations or a summary of the recommendations. Now, in some reports, your lecturer might say you don't need an executive summary. So it's always good to double check. And when you do need an executive summary, the length might vary. So in some cases, you might be asked to write a very brief, just 100 or 200 words executive summary. In others, you might be given longer. So looking at an example here, here's an example where there's quite a long executive summary. And we're going to walk through the process of how this executive summary is structured. So first of all, it gives a bit of context. Now, in this report, the student is talking about how they've designed a particular product. So how they've used the principles that they've talked about in the course to design power blocks, which is a particular product that solves some engineering problems, in particular electronics problems. And they talk about their aims in the report. So given that this is a report really pitched to justify why power blocks is going to be a useful product, why it's going to be really exciting for the industry, they're talking about then how their aims are involved in composing the functional modules that the power blocks consists of, as well as the power board and so on. But they're also talking about how they're going to market this particular product, because this was a requirement for this particular course, was to really write a report that pitches their product to the market. So their aims here are to explain why their proposed design, power blocks, is going to be relevant to the market. And then they start talking about their approach. So they're talking about the marketing approach that they're going to use for power blocks. So in another report, it could be that your approach is about how are you designing power blocks? How are you then implementing it? In this particular case, it's much more focused on what you're going to do with the market. So a Kickstarter campaign, a website, competitions, and really their key message in this approach section is about what they envision in terms of why the power block's going to be competitive to the market. The key findings are also included in the executive summary. So their key findings here are about why power blocks are really useful for the market, why they're going to be profitable and successful in the market. And at the towards the end of the executive summary, they're also talking about their key message, really emphasizing why they think power blocks is really going to be competitive, why they're going to be successful, and they're talking about their recommendations in terms of why should people buy them or why should people be interested in this particular piece of technology. So introductions, in contrast, contain a bit more about the background or the context for the problem that you're looking at, as well as talking about the aims and the scope, possibly the limitations of your report. So possibly identifying what your report does and does not do. You can also indicate your key message in your introduction and give an outline of the report structure. So let's look at an example from a computer science introduction. Now this, again, it's quite a long introduction. For a report that's shorter, you might be asked just to do this in 2 paragraphs, for instance. So looking at how it's structured, the introduction here is starting off with the broader context of what consensus problems are. And then they narrow it down to the consensus protocol issue and how they're looking at distributed methods and why they're useful for consensus protocols. So what they're doing in here is they're leading us into what their aims are going to be. And here in black, I've highlighted what their aims are going to be. So further investigating the consensus problem, the consensus protocol problem, and looking at the preliminary knowledge, as well as discussing the different forms of consensus protocols. So here they're talking about what are they going to do in the early part of the report. And you can see in orange how they've really clearly signposted or outlined the key parts of the report. So they say in this report, firstly, secondly, we also, so you know what's coming in which order. Then in the next part of the introduction, they're really talking about their implementation aims. And again, they're outlining how those parts of the report are structured. So we've got in the second part of the report, investigating the two main ideas that they're really looking at. So looking at the two-hop relay that they're presenting and its protocol performance. And so this is their implementation. And they've really highlighted this in the sentence where they say, we fill in this gap by proposing an adaptive coefficient setting method for the two-hop consensus, which leads to the key contribution of this paper. So they're really making their key message clear about why their implementation is really important for the field. So that key message neatly summarizes what their key contribution is. And then at the end of the introduction, they're recapping their aims, or they're reminding us of what their aims are. And at the end of it, they're wrapping it up by showing why overall does this report or does this project contribute to the field. So like the executive summary, it's talking about why is this work important. So executive summaries and introductions do very similar things in this regard. Now, if you're writing an introduction, you might be asked to include a literature review. So literature reviews might be placed in different parts of a report. So sometimes it might be embedded in your introduction. So it might actually be that in the introduction of your report, the very first couple of paragraphs are actually spelling out what is known and not known in the literature. So what are the problems that exist in the literature that you are going to try and solve? And so that might be done quite concisely, but it might also be more extensive as a separate section in your report. So you might actually have an introduction, first of all, then followed by a literature review, which goes into more details about the motivations for this study. So you might have a few paragraphs or even a couple of pages about what is known about this particular problem, what are the gaps in the research, and why is it important to fill those gaps with the project that you were doing. So really the literature review justifies your particular project. So it's spelling out why is your project needed in the field. So a literature review might be placed in a couple of different places in your report. So it's always good to check with your lecturer as to what they expect. So literature reviews, they draw on the academic literature to explain the motivation for your study, and they're involved in critically analysing and critically evaluating the literature to identify what are those gaps, what are those problems that you are going to focus on. So to wrap up this video, executive summaries and introductions give an overview of your report. So executive summaries are really comprehensive, talking about the purpose and the findings of your report, whereas the introductions provide more of the motivation for your work or for your report. And the introductions, they might be followed by a literature review, or they might include a bit of a literature review that explains the motivation for your work in relation to the academic literature. So that wraps up this particular video. And in the next one, we're going to be talking about how to structure the body of your report.